Greetings, listeners. You're tuning in to Sinister Soup, an audio imprint of Grendel Press for lovers of everything dark and delicious. I'm your host, Clay Vermolum. We hope you enjoy today's story, and remember to stay tuned afterwards for a featured interview with the author. See you on the other side. Auntie Lauretta's Gossip Recipes by Kuriata. Auntie Lauretta laced her recipes with gossip, and soon the whole town ate only food prepared under her precise instructions. 3 tablespoons butter, 1 cup milk, 1/2 teaspoon salt, 2 sequins off the dress Amanda Burton wore to the Dunright Inn the night her husband traveled to Welland for their son's funeral. The other aunties were upset. Their recipes were being ignored by the community, and they scrambled to regain our interest. Auntie Baloo tried cramming her recipes with jokes. Unaware the bulk of the town's kitchen work was undertaken by weary, exhausted folks who'd just finished a 12-hour day and had no patience for her stories about French-Canadian trappers or talking beavers. Anyway, her jokes were terrible. No surprise, considering she copied them off the lids of disinterred coffins. Grave robbers like Auntie Baloo are notorious for their bad sense of humor. We stuck with Auntie Lauretta's recipes. 1/4 cup minced onions, 1 tablespoon salt, 1 1/4 pounds ground beef, a drop of water from the church cistern where Father Pierre no longer bothers to bless, but in fact spits into it. Auntie Marjane filled her recipes with sex stories. Erotic imaginings, guides to exquisite new positions, the aunties published their recipes by tacking them to the Tentacle Tree, so named because of its twisted branches that resembled an octopus. Auntie Marjane rushed to publish her latest sex-filled recipe, running with her thighs clamped together, soaking wet. In 6 months, this whole town will be flooded in either pregnancy or an STD epidemic, she predicted. 6 months' time saw neither. Auntie Marjane's ideas of eroticism did not align with her readers. Her poor grasp of anatomy made her tips not only painful to imagine, but physically impossible to practice. At least with a living partner. We stuck with Auntie Lauretta's recipes. 1 tablespoon butter, 4 tablespoons green pepper, a pinch of dirt from Mom Haley's garden, where she buried the jewelry stolen between her mother's last breath and the arrival of her sisters. Eventually, the rest of the aunties stepped aside, leaving Auntie Lauretta as the sole writer of recipes in the Pelham region. She was the undisputed culinary champion. "Let me prepare tonight's meal," my husband said. Though he'd scrubbed twice, his hands remained black from the mine dust. When miners passed away, the undertaker insisted on burying them in flesh-colored gloves to keep their hands from staining the linen lining their caskets. I had Auntie Lauretta's newest recipe snatched fresh off the tree. Still, my husband insisted. Would it kill us to miss one night of gossip? He cooked as his grandfather had, in the days before aunties wrote their recipes. He built a spit from sticks and made a fire in the yard. We took turns sprinkling salt and sage over his freshly butchered meat. The meal tasted delicious. We lay back together, and I kissed the grease from his cheeks and chin. "We should do this again," he said. That I didn't readily agree led to an argument, a nasty one. My husband had long been simmering unflattering opinions of the aunties, and he unleashed them all at the top of his voice. I hoped no one was listening. After he sequestered himself in the bedroom, I took Auntie Lauretta's unused recipe from my pocket and read by the light of our cooking fire. 1 pound beef liver, 1 chopped onion, 1 bay leaf from Patrick Mage's bush, where he hides behind to stare into the bedroom window of his neighbor's youngest child. Despite my husband's anger, I maintained fidelity to Auntie Lauretta's meals, not because of morbid attraction to her gossip, but to make sure our names never found their way into one of her recipes. Seems we weren't the only household to enjoy an original meal. Deep below the earth, in the belly of the mine, where the aunties could not hear, the men and women put down their pickaxes and conspired to cook their own recipes. 1 day a week they agreed, just to show her we aren't dependent on her gossip, they said. When my husband and I next roasted fresh meat and vegetables, neighbors ambled over, drawn by the delicious aroma smoking into the sky. This smells remarkable. Please, my husband urged, join us. At the meal's end, I placed Auntie Lauretta's freshest recipe into the fire where it burned faster than cigarette paper. I couldn't fall asleep, her words repeating over and over in my mind like an ominous warning. 1 tablespoon butter, 2 beaten eggs, 1 pinch of mine dust from your husband's hand, the left one, which roams over Mavis Richler while they plot against me in the darkest parts of the mine. Offended by so many of her recipes left behind on the Tentacle Tree, Auntie Lauretta adjusted the embedded gossip. Now, they seemed more like prophecy. This easy-to-prepare dish works perfect as either picnic fare or something for the funeral after a pressure rupture splits Mavis Richler's whole face wide open. My husband read the recipe as I cracked eggs into a skillet. The neighbors no longer came over when we cooked dinner. They were too busy doing their own original cooking. It's not prophecy, my husband said. Only a weak attempt at a threat. He doesn't think so next week when the miners return to the surface early. My husband is one of the 4 cradling Mavis Richler's lifeless, bloody body. At the funeral, she is buried without gloves because her head stains the linen lining so badly the casket has to be closed anyway. Chains covered in mine dust are wrapped around the Tentacle Tree. Horses, men, women, even children plucked from the schoolhouse pull until the roots rip from the ground. The violent tearing of the earth sounds like I'm listening to my own scalping. We drag the trunk down the escarpment and set it on fire. The Tentacle Tree blazes all night and fuels our celebration. We cook over the tree, each of us sharing food, pushing extra mouthfuls between one another's lips. The pungent smoke from the Tentacle Tree makes my mind feel as though it's flying outside my body. The introduction of spirits does nothing to slow the festivities. Soon, we are disrobing and writhing serpentine across the ground, caring not the age or sex or family relation of who we draw into our lusty embrace. Only when the trunk smolders during the break of dawn do we go still, all our appetites finally satiated. After the bacchanal, there are no more recipes from Auntie Lauretta. Why should she bother? There is no gossip she can share that will be worse than what we all participated in around the blazing Tentacle Tree. In the harsh morning light, while we scrambled to pick our clothes from the ground, we were astonished by the number of bones lying in the dirt. I try to remember exactly what we ate that night, but can recall only that it was tasty and I kept calling for more. Our numbers have been whittled down. There are far less of us now. I don't make fires anymore, preferring my vegetables raw. The animals I set free, I won't eat meat. Not after that night. I've eaten my fill. Too much. Too fast. Our neighbors try to forget, carrying on like before. Working in the mine and hanging their laundry. They even dig up Auntie Baloo's old recipes, but the jokes never made them laugh. At night, I write my own recipes. They will surely come in handy for the one swelling my belly. During the years of our marriage, my husband's seeds never took, and he was ashamed to think he had a broken stem inside himself somewhere. At least he's been spared this cruelty, for he's counted among the many who never returned from the Tentacle Tree, the meat sucked from his bones. I wonder, did I taste him? I smell smoke from the neighbors. They only cook after midnight, not wanting to be seen. I close the window and climb into bed to resume my writing. Line the bottom of the pan with half a sliced eggplant. Layer in 2 cups of chopped mushrooms, 1 cup chopped zucchini, 3 crushed tomatoes. Cover with remainder of sliced eggplant. No gossip, no prophecy, not even painful history. Just how to prepare food and the implied blessings of your enjoyment. Thank you, Chris, for this strange and disturbing little story. I had such a blast reading this, and we're so thankful you provided us with a bit of darkness and brevity in the Sinister Soup lexicon. I particularly enjoyed your commentary on the small community in this story. Not only the power of gossip to an isolated and self-governing social group, but to the importance of individuality, freedom, and community, and how they all play off one another, especially around an important social construct like mealtime and intercommunal expectations. I'm also a sucker for any story that starts off in the weird and gets continuously darker until we find ourselves immersed in the depths of human depravity, and I think you did well to illustrate that tendency in this narrative. Well done, Chris, and thank you so much for sharing your work with us. If you enjoyed this story, you're in luck. Chris Kuriata has many short stories available online right now. He also has several novels and is included in a few anthologies that you can pick up and check out. All that information, as well as where to follow him on social media, can be found at his website, www.chriscuriata.wordpress.com. That link will also be in the online readable version of this story on the Grendel Press website. This has been Sinister Soup, an audio and online imprint of Grendel Press for lovers of everything dark and delicious. To all you listeners, thank you so much for being here. As always, I've been Claver Molum, your host, and until next time, we'll see you on the other side.
All right, so I've been asked to read and answer these questions. 1. Can you speak to your journey as a writer? How did you get started, and how has it gone for you? I was a film editor, living in Saskatchewan, working on documentary series, true crime stuff, war, airplane crashes. You know, it always surprised me when the police would send us all the crime scene photos. Like, I would have thought that kind of stuff was handled more sensitively. Anyway, I got into the habit of working on short stories during downtime, writing them in little 15-minute increments, so it could take a couple weeks before I had a finished story. But I did wind up with, I think, 3 finished pieces that I thought were good enough to send out to magazines. Around this time, I wound up moving from Saskatchewan back to Ontario, where I grew up. And being back in the Niagara region, I think gave me a big creative boost. I know that every place has its own flavor of weirdness, but the Niagara region has its own special kind of weirdness. There's so much history here, from the War of 1812 battles, to this being the place Harriet Tubman brought the people she helped rescue from slavery, to all the fascination around Niagara Falls, even leading into modern times with this being home to Canada's most notorious serial killer couple. If you believe the idea that hauntings and other strange incidents are the result of energy echoing from major events, then Niagara has certainly been a very busy place. Anyway, after coming back here, I started focusing on writing, and after a couple years of sending stories to various magazines, I finally broke through and began publishing regularly. The whole indie publishing industry seemed to be expanding as a result of print on demand, making printing easier, especially if you were doing limited runs. So there were lots of people starting up publications, and they were looking for stories, so I had an opportunity to show my stuff around. Around the same time, I also discovered that there were lots of horror and fantasy podcasts that did performances of stories, like Pseudopod, Tales to Terrify. The No Sleep podcast is my favorite. I'm also really fortunate that I had great experiences in those first couple years. As time goes on, you eventually run into problems with publications, sometimes, ranging all the way from projects being canceled at the last minute to, people being extremely dickish or unethical. And I sometimes wonder if some of those bad things had happened to me with my first stories, would I have given up thinking like, this whole thing is a shit show, I don't want to be involved? I was treated so well by the quote-unquote non-professional markets. Eventually, I took a break from short fiction to focus on my novel, Sacrifice of the Sister's Lot, which I'm very proud of, and I'm sure I'll mention a few more times during this interview. 2. Do you have a project up to this point that you're most proud of, published or not? Can you tell us about the creation of that project? What was the inspiration for it? What was the writing process like? What was a memorable moment from the creation of the project? Yeah, like I said, I'm proud of my novel, Sacrifice of the Sister's Lot. The inspiration for it started off as I thought I was writing a short story. I was at the Mansion House, which used to be this glorious old tavern in St. Catharines, where the interior was all dark wood that made it look like you were below deck on a boat. It was a great place to concentrate, so that was my office for a few years. I wrote this short story about 4 sisters who lose their kitten in the walls of the family house and discover there is some malevolent force living inside the walls that their parents knew all about but managed to keep secret. A little after finishing that story, I started working on another one, again about these 4 sisters. This time one of them was working in the peach fields and being harassed by this mysterious stranger. About halfway through that, I realized this story was starting to connect with the plot of the first one, that entity in the wall being the source of all these problems. And that instead of a couple short stories, I actually had the opening chapters of a novel. So I spent the next 4 months on the first draft of The Sister's Lot, and it was the most fun I'd ever had working on a project, certainly one of that length. This story lived inside my head. I was constantly thinking about it, constantly thinking things over, trying to untangle plot elements. I kept a notebook in my bed, and sometimes at night an idea would come to me, and I'd sketch a little doodle of this scene, which turned out to be a better way of making notes than writing them down as words. I think that like a lot of times writing out extensive notes kills your enthusiasm for an idea, but when you have just like this little sketch, it's something to interpret now and expand on. What was so exciting about the book was that I'd stumbled across the voice of the narrator, Emery, a 12-year-old girl who was not me. So for the first time, it felt like I was writing stuff that was not written by me, which is a very exciting feeling. And since the story took place in the late 80s, this allowed me to go through my experiences of growing up in the Niagara region at that time, only filtered through Emery's point of view. I finished the first draft in the Mansion House on my birthday. I write everything in longhand first, and that was an exciting day. And I think the memory of that probably kept me going through the years of polishing the manuscript and looking for a publisher, which was a long process. 3. Same question as above, but this time about Auntie Lauretta's gossip recipes. I wrote Auntie Lauretta's gossip recipes for an online journal called Riddled with Arrows, which was edited by Shannon Connon Winward, which is no longer running, but all the pieces are still up online, and it's worth visiting. The site has a nice design to it. Riddled with Arrows was focused on writing about writing, and although I'm not a big fan of stuff that's very meta, I was thinking about recipes at the time, and thought it would be interesting to do a horror story based around them. I love to cook, and I'll be humble and declare myself an excellent cook, something that came from decades of trial and error and experimenting to perfect the best way to prepare things. I love that creative aspect of cooking, when you're just looking at what's in the fridge, seeing what's about to go bad, seeing what needs to get used, and just working with whatever elements you have to make something. It's a different energy than baking, which is all about measurement and timing and precision. I admire my mother's skills as a baker. That's something I never cultivated. 4. One of my favorite thematic explorations in recipes was the importance of mealtime and community, how it affects us both as individuals and the larger organism that an isolated community culture is. I enjoyed the interplay with the recipes and the town people, the unspoken taboos, the coming together and then disbanding around connection and individual pursuits. Do you have an innate fascination with the inner workings of families, communities, and societies as it relates to mealtime? If so, where does that interest come from? Have you written about this sort of thing anywhere else? Well, it seems to me that our strongest memories are usually tied to eating, because eating often pulls us together, whether it's at holidays or funerals. You bring food when there's a celebration. You bring food as a way to help when a family is dealing with sickness or grieving. I still remember this rice dish my grandmother used to cook all the time. I'd watch her pour dry rice into a frying pan, then dump in water, frozen chicken breasts, a carrot, some spices, then just leave the whole thing simmering for a couple of hours. And it came out magnificent. The rice perfectly cooked, the seasoning so flavorful, the chicken tender. Like, I would give anything to eat that dish again. And I've tried replicating this very basic recipe, but for whatever reason, it doesn't come out at all like how she made it. There's some secret agent that I'll never find. I did another story centered around eating for an anthology of recipe-inspired stories called Food of My People. That story had to do with people immigrating to a new land and looking for ingredients or substitute ingredients to make the food that they were accustomed to. I wanted to show the way that eating provides affirmation that, yes, we can live and survive here. I'm also interested in the world's culinary ecosystem, where bugs eat the plants, animals eat the bugs, humans eat the animals, and then humans die and return to the dirt and carbon that feeds the plants and reignites the cycle all over again. I have a story centered around this called Auntie and the Slaughtering Process, which has a passage in it that goes, anything capable of thought is capable of being food. None of humanity's grand history or philosophical musings will save us from our destiny as nutrition. It isn't enough that we must die. We must also become edible. True nobility comes from recognizing your position on the food chain. Know the highest life forms are eventually consumed by the lowest. 5. This is a story that does well to merge dark comedy with horror, the absurd with the realistic. Would you say blending these different tones and expectations is characteristic of your writing style? If not, how would you characterize your writing style? If so, where did that come from for you? As a kid, my favorite things always mixed horror with humor. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, Scooby-Doo, Return of the Living Dead, which I know is not a kid's movie, but I did see it when I was 9, and it made a huge impression on me, specifically because it was both disturbing and funny. Humor seems to be something that just comes into my writing naturally. And sometimes I don't even realize something is funny until I read it before an audience and it gets laughter. I think that's because it's not about making jokes. If you're describing something with honesty, the reader can recognize the truth or the absurdity of that makes it funny. 6. If people like this story, what's a novel they should read and a movie they should watch that's in a similar vein? If you're interested in a book that mixes the absurd with realism, one of my favorite books I've read in the last few years is 15 Dogs by Andre Alexis, which takes an absurd premise, which is a group of 15 dogs are given human consciousness by the gods as part of a bet to see if any of these dogs can live with self-awareness and still die happy. And it follows through their experiences with a realistic depiction of how these thinking dogs would develop. And it creates one of the most emotional and philosophically rich books I've ever read. And I know some people say they can't handle it in a book when the dog dies. And I always wonder how they would manage something like this, where all 15 of them eventually go. If you're interested in food-related stories, even though it's not fantasy or horror, Babette's Feast is a great movie about cooking and community. It's about a French woman living in exile amongst a village of very devout religious folk who don't believe in the pleasures of the world, that you should be focusing on living a pious life and you will get your reward in the hereafter. And Babette used to be this renowned French chef who winds up winning the lottery and spends all the money having exotic ingredients shipped to this tiny Danish village so she can cook this extravagant meal of pheasant and turtle soup and fine wine, which the villagers, they've been invited, and they all conspire ahead of time to make sure they behave as if they don't enjoy any of it, not to give any sign of pleasure as they eat all these different flavors. And it's a struggle. During the meal, you can see, their masks starting to slip during the course of this banquet. 7. What are you working on right now? Can you tell us about it? I've got a few different novels in various stages of development. One involves an alternate world version of Johnny Carson, who is being blackmailed by a group of dead children who want to use his talk show as a way to get revenge on the witch who cursed them. I've also got my attempt at a rom-com about the romance between the son of an expert chocolatier and a funeral director who are both trying to fulfill his father's bizarre funeral requests. It's a bit morbid. And I've just finished a novel about the sisters from Sister's Lot, as adults now, trying to live in the woods but always being harassed by boys from the city, and their revenge plan gets out of hand and leads to widespread mayhem. 8. Where can people find and follow you? I'm on Instagram at c.kuriata, C.Kuriata, and you can find links to a lot of my stories that are online at ccuriata.wordpress.com. In person, in September 13th, I'll be at the second annual DreadCon convention, which is a convention that focuses on dark fiction, horror, stuff like that. Some of the other authors there will be Nick Cutter, Kelly Armstrong, Aaron Beauregard. I had a great time at last year, so I look forward to attending. I'll be there with Sister's Lot, as well as my new short story collection, Birdhouse Caskets. DreadCon is being held in Burlington, Ontario this year, September 13th. I'll also be at Word on the Street in Toronto the weekend of September 27th and 28th. It's a 2-day festival. I'm friendly and enjoy meeting people, so say hi if you see me.